why do you base your morals on something that's predetermined for you? Like, in terms of, like, why do you follow the Bible? Why do you follow the teachings of the Bible rather than living your life to the fullest and experiencing everything, and then from there deciding what's good and bad? Is it because there's an afterlife and there's potentially some sort of promise in it for you in the end?
I live my life morally the way I do because I have a conscience and a rational mind. And my conscience informs me that a racist attitude towards him...
I'm not willing to argue that. I'm just saying that from your standpoint, saying that as you defined it, having an emotion, there's more to it than a neurochemical process is just null and voided by people with certain disorders. I mean, it doesn't make sense. You can't say that there's more to my emotion. Like, I can have the conscious decision to feel this way even though I can't physically, chemically produce these particles. I don't have the brain structures to feel this way, but I can make the decision to feel that way. And for you to say that we can't hold people accountable who don't have those brain structures as like a definition of like not being able to, I guess, feel those emotions, we can't hold them accountable or as an example, is just pretty much ignoring part of the population. So
there is a physical component to all of us. Now, when you write up the chemical description of the human brain, I am convinced you're not telling the whole story, because there's a free will. My genius brother has more ability to make a responsible, free decision than my sister does. But still, they both have a free will, and I hold them both responsible to differing degrees, but they still have a free will, and therefore I hold them responsible for what they do. But if I was an atheist, and if I believed that all of reality is matter and energy, then I have no basis for believing there's a free will. Because there's simple biochemical reactions that go off.
They actually did an experiment, and it's in a book called The Actor's Brain. I forgot the name of the experiment, but basically they had like people push like a button, and they monitored their brain activity and their awareness of pushing that button, and they had them write down when their awareness of them physically moving to push that button occurred. And relative to their brain activity, there was like a minuscule time difference between when their brain activity, which happened first, relative to when they actually were aware of their action of doing it. They were going to do it, which kind of, I guess, null and voids the idea of free will to some extent, because if your brain activity occurs prior to your awareness of it, then wouldn't you say that it's a deterministic pathway?
Well, you're being consistent with a secular atheistic worldview. But let me ask you, has anybody ever loved you?
Sure, yes.
What does that mean?
I don't really know how to define that.
Okay, well, you told me that people have loved you. So what do you mean when you say people have loved me?
I guess they have physiological responses and mental responses to being around me.
Good. Okay, I respect your intellectual consistency. My experience is that people do not have to love me. People choose to love me freely. In fact, if there was a woman who was being paid to love me, I would not be interested.
I mean, that's a valid point.
I am not interested in marrying a woman who's an automaton, a machine, and has to love me. I am interested in marrying a human being, a woman, who freely chooses to love me because she chooses to. And I don't think you're any different from me.
I guess love is a really complex emotion.
Yes.
And what I'm defining is a really simplistic process. So I really don't have an argument to what you're saying, only because it's such a complex process that I can't bring up an experiment, or I can't give you any sort of sightings or any reason that you wouldn't be able to null and void. But I guess at the end of the day, every complex process is designed by smaller, simplistic processes. And you can agree with that, right? I mean, every complex process comes from an amass or a grouping of very smaller, simplistic processes. So we could say that love maybe is deterministic.
Okay, the way I live my life is, if I fall down these stairs, I don't pick myself up at the bottom and say, phew, I'm glad that's over.
Well, yeah, because you're not aware of it, though. You're not aware of the fact that your life could be deterministic, because your conscious is only a reflection of these decisions that are already made.
When I fall down these stairs, I pick myself up at the bottom, ma'am, and I say, idiot, Cliff, don't stumble. Pick your feet up. Don't fall down the stairs again. That's
it's not necessarily
the world that I
you made
live
the
in.
Decision to fall, but the stumbling, and it maybe wasn't an active decision, but a process gone wrong, like mentally. which caused you to fall, and your perception is, oh, I stumbled, I'm stupid, and now I've fallen. Does that make sense?
Does it make sense that I have a free will to say, Cliff, that was not a very good thing to do. Don't do that again.
If you had a free will, then you wouldn't have stumbled down the stairs in the first place, right?
No, but you see, my point is, I have a free will that judges my decisions or my lack of decisions.
So then your free will is a reflection of decisions that are made.
No, my free will can critique the decisions that I make.
So it's a reflection of decisions you make.
No, it critiques the decisions I make.
But if it's critiquing it, when those decisions have to be made in order to critique them?
Yes.
So do you actively make those decisions?
Yes.
So you're saying that your free will is both a critique and an active decision making of the decisions you make?
I'm saying that my free will enables me every night to sit on the corner of my bed and judge my decisions of the day. And guess what? I'm convinced you do the same thing. But you see, your worldview does not allow for that. Your worldview says, no, it's all determined. Then why do you critique yourself? Watch the movie Munich. Palestinians grabbed the Israeli athletes, 1972, Olympics, Munich, Germany. Those Palestinians kidnapped the Israeli athletes. The Israelis make a rescue attempt. It fails, and all the Israeli athletes are killed, murdered. Then Prime Minister Golda Meir has a conference with her leaders, and she decides, we're not going to go get those Palestinian kidnappers and bring them to a court of law to be judged. Instead, we are hiring people to go out and kill those Palestinian suspects. Money is under the table, the passports are false, but Golda Meir looks into the faces of her leaders and says, it is necessary in the course of every civilization to negotiate compromises with your values. That's good, Golda Meir. You're acknowledging, I know that it's wrong to hire the hit squad to go out and wipe out the Palestinians. I know it's wrong, but I have to negotiate compromises with the values that I hold to. She knew flat out that what she was doing was wrong. She made a decision to violate those values and to do what was expedient, she thought. That's self-reflection. That's self-perception. That's judging yourself. Ma'am, if that ain't free will, I don't know what is.
So I guess that brings another question that I actually had, which was my original question that I was going to ask. And now that I'm here, I guess I will ask. Why would you base your, I guess, the way I live life is to experience everything and decide from that, I guess, to create my own morals from that experience of whether or not something made me happy, made me sad, so on and so forth. If I had an emotional response to these things, I guess, why do you base your morals on something that's predetermined for you? Like in terms of like, why do you follow the Bible? Why do you follow the teachings of the Bible rather than living your life to the fullest and experiencing everything and then from there deciding what's good and bad? Is it because there's an afterlife and there's potentially some sort of promise in it for you in the end?
I live my life morally the way I do because I have a conscience and a rational mind. And my conscience informs me that a racist attitude towards him is degrading, demeaning, it is evil. My conscience informs me of that.
Okay.
I do not have to tell a racist joke about him and experience racism in order to know that racism is wrong.
Okay.
I can choose to follow my conscience and respect the man and say, I know that demeaning him through a racist joke is wrong. I don't have to experience that in order to know it's wrong. I can follow my conscience and do what's right.
Isn't that like a compilation of historical like viewings? Like, for example, you brought up the Nazi argument. You can look back in history and be like, wow, they were really racist and they gassed a lot of Jews and killed them. That's wrong. You know what I mean? You're basing it based on a historical fact. So, I mean, consciously when you say that's wrong to make a joke, that's racist, it's not because of your conscience, and it's not embedded in you, it's more of your rationality, which is a product of history and what you've read and the components that make you up as an individual and your upbringing and nurture in that aspect. But I guess my question is, like, why do you follow the morals why do you follow this guideline of morals? Like, what's the point of it to you personally?
My conscience and my rational mind convince me that there is a value of justice that is totally violated by my racist attitude.
Okay.
I am convinced that morality is not relative because my conscience and my rational mind convince me that racism is degrading, demeaning, and therefore absolutely wrong. Second point, I have found that I'm not very intelligent until it comes to rationalizing what I want to do. Then I turn downright brilliant. If I want to do something badly enough, I can find a reason to justify it. That is why I need a plumb line from the one who gave me my conscience and gave me my rational mind. I am so glad that God has revealed a plumb line through the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, through Jesus Christ, the Sermon on the Mount, and I can measure my conscience against that plumb line to find out what is truly good, what is truly just, what is truly loving.
Well, what if you find yourself finding that your conscience contradicts one of like the Ten Commandments? What do you do in that case? Do you compromise?
In that case, I have to do a lot of thinking, a lot of praying, a lot of being very honest with myself. What is really going on here? And bottom line is, I have to make a decision. Does God deserve my trust ultimately, or do I deserve my trust ultimately? And I think the evidence is Jesus Christ is far more reliable than I am. I've tried to live a life like Jesus lived, and I have failed miserably. He pulled it off. He died. He rose from the dead. So the evidence is Christ deserves my trust in a way that I do not.
Okay, that's valid.
Thank you so much for raising those issues.
It just seems like part of the human mind that we need these messiahs, we need these legends in order to live our own lives.
Really?
And yeah. Like
Well,
you were asking Kevin earlier, like what motivates you? We need, if you don't have anything that's motivating you, then yeah, you would kill yourself. Sort of, maybe. I don't know
Yeah.
what I'm going at. But
that's
what I'm
good
basically
point.
trying
That's
to
good,
say
Max.
is that everyone needs a motivator, and it kind of seems it's human nature to, if it actually doesn't exist, if the complete truth is that there isn't, that we make it up.
Okay. And yet, to think carefully, if there is no God, then it means my birth is an accident, my death is an accident, which means the only thing that lies between those two accidents is another accident.
But see, that's
my life.
That's kind of like an emotional appeal too, because no one wants to believe in their life that no one ever wants to believe that that they were born by accident, or that murder might actually not be immoral or an absolute evil. It just seems that we want to believe that, so we rationalize that. That's the number one. That's one of the greatest traits of humankind. We can rationalize basically anything.
Okay. When I tell you that if it's true that my birth is an accident and my death is an accident, that it follows that the only thing between those two accidents is another accident, my life. I'm not appealing to your emotions, I'm appealing to your mind.
No, but that
Think
sucks.
reasonably.
Who here wants that to happen? Who here wants that's the final answer, that we're all an accident?
All right,
That
Max.
doesn't necessarily mean it's true, not true.
Good. And guess what, Max? In order to graduate from this place, you're going to have to study. And that sucks. But sir, that's part of growing up, right? That's part of maturing and getting in touch with reality. So, if it's true that my birth is an accident and my death is an accident, I better grow up and face that reality that life is absurd. It's just an accident. And if that's true, I got to grow up, and although I don't like it, I better accept it because it's true.
Well, the weird thing is, if that is true, I wouldn't want to believe that.
Why
and
not?
I would want to make up a god.
So you do believe in God?
No, I'm saying I want to believe in God. I don't believe in God, but I want to believe in
Then
God.
why don't you believe in God?
Because it's just so hard to with the lack of, I'm just so weary.
With the lack of evidence?
I was going to say evidence. Too big a buzzword. But yeah, it's just so hard to comprehend that. Because it's just, it's impossible to argue that, that the life of a believer is, I think, anyone here could say that the life of a believer is more comfortable than the life of a non-believer. Because that is such a horrible truth, that we're here by accident.
Okay, C.S. Lewis
But that
disagrees
doesn't
with
necessarily mean it's not true.
me. See, C.S. Lewis did not want there to be a God. And I understand why. I have a good buddy who went to Harvard, and he goes to the church now in Connecticut that I pastor. And he sat with me and said, Cliff, when I got to Harvard, I wanted to live a certain lifestyle. The problem is that the lifestyle that I wanted to live made me feel guilty. So I had to figure out a way to deal with my guilt. Very simple. I became an atheist. Because you see, if there is no God, guilt is fantasy. Nothing to feel guilty about. Just do whatever.
But that's the other end of the emotional appeal, though, side. He's using atheism as a way to rationalize his bad behavior.
Good.
But
So we better be very careful about our emotions, and we better be as objective as we're able to and really analyze the situation, right?
But God appeals to the other side of the coin, to someone like Mother Teresa who's doing so much good in the world and saying, like, what for?
But remember, Mother Teresa really struggled with doubt. She was very honest about that in her diaries, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, you know, everyone who does good in the world wants to be rewarded for it. And God is a very convenient, perfect answer for that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true,
Correct.
like you're saying, but
I mean, it's true.
God is awesome.
Yeah, I agree with that. He is
Just like
awesome.
it explains everything. Like, you don't know something,
No.
God did it.
No, it doesn't explain everything. There are a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of mysteries for me as a follower of Christ. I don't have the answers to all the questions, that's for sure. I do not know is one of my favorite answers, because it's the truth. I don't know why God allowed suffering. I don't know why God didn't have Hitler's mother have a miscarriage. Would have been rather convenient. Okay, so there are lots of things I don't know. The question is, what does the evidence point to? And clearly, Max, if you look at the options, and that's what I did with your fellow student Kevin before.
Yeah.
Remember, I can't have certainty, positive, about anything in life. Everything is vague to one extent, but that doesn't mean I can't know. Do you think I can prove my wife?
No, I think that's
Good.
exactly it, though. It's just not. It's not that there's evidence. It's just that I don't know yet. I don't know yet, and eventually we will know.
We will know? Not if atheism is true. If atheism is true, we don't know nothing.
20 years
100
ago,
years
we didn't
from
know
now.
a lot that we know now.
Yeah, but if
Just to
atheism is
basically-
true, we're all going to die and become fertilizer, so we don't know nothing. Right? We're dead and we become fertilizer. So we're not going to find out. If atheism is true, I'm never going to find out that that's true, because when we all die, we all become extinct. Right? But if Jesus Christ is the truth, then all of us, atheist, agnostic, Christian, are going to find out whether it's true or not.
That's an unfair advantage you have in this debate.
It's a point I just realized a little while ago.
Yeah, I only have 40 years.
You know, if the atheist is correct, we're never going to find that out. We're all going to die and become fertilizer. If the follower of Christ is correct, we're all going to stand before Christ one day and find out that indeed he is true. See, that motivated Blaise Pascal to come up with a wager. You know, in light of that fact, don't you think you'd be wiser to really check out Christ?
But the wager is a classic example of logical fallacy. Isn't the wager, if I'm correct, is that the one, like the thought problem of, like there's two options. You can either believe in God or not believe in God.
Yep.
And if you don't believe in God,
Right?
and there's a God, you go to hell. But
Right.
if you do and there's not, then so what?
Yeah.
But if you do and there is a God, you get to go to heaven.
Yep.
Yay. I mean, that just seems such like a grab almost.
Yeah. Until you study Pascal's life. Pascal was a brilliant scientist, brilliant, way ahead of his time. He was also into gambling. That was a rather popular activity in his day, to gamble. So it's coming out of that experience of being both a scientist
So he believes
and
in
a
God
gambler.
it seems that he's believes in God out of a gamble. Like that's the best possible choice for him. Almost.
No, he was a brilliant scientist. You see, what Pascal would be saying to you today, right now, I'm convinced is, Max, because the stakes are so high in what we're talking about right now, you better go back and study this really carefully. Because if there is a God and if Jesus Christ is the truth, the consequences last for eternity. But if there is no God, there are no real consequences.
But that's a big
that separate
that's a
us.
huge if and kind of like an unfair decision for me to make.
Unfair decision?
For like to think in that sort of way. To
Oh no, Max.
to make life choices not based on what's right and what's wrong. I mean, like what's fact and what's fiction.
Well, that's why I said you
Based
got to
on
go
what's
back
the
and
best
study.
for your-
No, you got to go back and study. Max, have you studied the Gospels?
A little bit.
Okay.
I've been to a few youth groups and whatnot.
Good.
and
All right,
church
now,
once in a while.
Max, the issue is so important, no longer is a little bit acceptable. Because the issue is so significant, Max, you really got to study this thing and put it to bed. You got to figure out, is this Jesus Christ a quack, a myth, or is this Jesus Christ the truth? That's Pascal's point.
He is, everything
Yes.
the Bible claims he is,
Right.
then why isn't he able to conquer the devil? And why does hell exist still?
Good.
If God is all-powerful, and if he does love me,
Yep.
then wouldn't he want me to go to heaven?
Yep, he
like,
does.
Why is there that option that, like, how did sin come into this earth if God is all-powerful?
Great point. Excellent. I love your thinking. Rachel, when we say that God is all-powerful, we do not mean that God can make 2 + 2 = 5.
Why not?
Because it's irrational, it's illogical, it contradicts
God-
reality.
But is God, like, rational?
Oh yes, absolutely. God cannot make himself exist and not exist at the same time in the same way. That's impossible. God cannot make a square circle. Can't do that. God cannot make a square circle. So what does the Bible mean when it says that God is all-powerful? It means that God is all-powerful over his creation. It doesn't mean that God can start making square circles and 2 + 2 = 5. No. Okay? Now, this is my own rational thinking, okay? This is not out of the Bible. You've asked a very good question. Well, then why did God create us if he knew that some of us would reject him and go to hell? God chose to partially limit his power by creating us with a free will. In other words, if I am free, I can pull out my wallet and give you money for dinner.
Okay.
Okay? Or I can racially slur you. Okay? I don't have to do either. Okay? Now, Rachel, I think you have that free will. I think you can choose to pocket that money or to give it back to me. I don't think you have to do either. All right? I really think that's real. Now, if God chose to partially limit his power by creating us free, it means he cannot intervene every time to stop me from slapping you, to paralyze my tongue so I don't slur you. No, if he gave me a free will, he respects that. That is reality, which means he allows me to be mean to you or to respect you according to what I freely choose. But he will judge me for what I choose. And if I choose to demean you, if I choose to slur you, he will judge me for that.
Well, then I have another question that goes along with that. I guess, like, when God created human beings,
Right?
Adam and Eve, going back to Genesis,
Right.
they had a choice whether they wanted to eat from the tree of life,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Wouldn't you say that us nowadays, like, we're born with sin?
Good point.
We don't have choice whether we want to sin or not. Because, like, no matter how much I don't want to sin, I'm going to sin, because when I was born to sin. And therefore, why should I suffer those consequences that I was born into?
Good. Great question. I think that Jesus and the Bible teach that you and I are born with a readiness to sin factor. But that does not mean that I have to sin. I disagree with a person who says, Cliff, you have to be self-centered. You have to lust. You have to be racist.
You don't have to, but it does
Good.
come innately. Like, every person will sin no matter what. Like, there is no perfect person on this earth.
Okay, good
Right.
point. Except for Christ, he lived a sinless life.
Right. Except for Christ.
Right.
So therefore, like how is that my fault that I sin if I was born into that? Like, do you get what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. It's a very thoughtful, very hard question you're raising, Rachel, and I appreciate it. Okay. You're right. You and I are born broken. You and I are born scarred according to Christ and according to my experience. A lot of brokenness, a lot of scarred on me. Now, God does not hold me responsible for that.
But he does when he judges us.
Okay, but his judgment of us is holding us responsible for our free decision.
Okay.
But you're right, we're not born in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
right? We're born into a cursed, messed up, unfair world.
Right.
But to argue that we're responsible for that, I disagree with. That's why, to tell you the truth, Rachel, I do not believe that a child who dies goes to hell. Okay? Because a child who dies did not have a free will that makes them responsible for their decisions.
But they still do sin. Because like if if he's holy, like God can't allow sin into heaven.
Good.
So if a child does die and they do sin,
Right.
because children do sin, like there's no, right? You would agree with me and say that children do sin.
That's a very hard question.
It is, but if God is like perfect and holy and clean,
Yes.
he can't allow sin into heaven.
Correct.
If a child does sin, like they wouldn't go to heaven because God can't allow sin into heaven. So therefore they would go to hell.
Okay, and obviously I'm trying to make an argument that no, children do not sin until they reach an age of accountability where they are able to make their own decision. Let me give you a quick example.
I
Little
have a
Johnny.
question really fast. Sorry.
All right, go ahead.
Is that just like your thought, or is that is that biblical, or is that just like?
Well, unfortunately, the Bible is more silent.
Okay.
You're right. If I have to be honest, the Bible never answers the question, how is God going to judge a 2-year-old who dies?
Right.
I don't know from the Bible.
Right.
So what I have to do is I've got to start just using my mind and thinking it through. So, how did Jesus treat children? He always embraced them.
Right.
In fact, he turned to adults and said, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like a little child, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
Talking about childlike trust, not childishness,
Right.
but childlike trust.
Right.
Now, you're perceptive, though. I agree with you that all of us are born with this sinful nature or a readiness to sin factor. But read Romans chapter 5. And in Romans chapter 5, I think Paul makes a comparison between Christ died on a cross for our sins, the whole world. Well, fine, but we have to make a decision to put our faith in it. And he also points out we're born into sin. Fine, but what does that mean? That in the same way that we're not all going to heaven because Christ died for the sins of the world, we're only going to heaven if we respond. So yes, we're born in sin, but no, that sin doesn't become operative until I make a decision to do wrong. 5-year-old goes to kindergarten for the first time, comes back, sits down at the dinner table. Mom puts the plate before him. 5-year-old puts the food in the mouth, says, oh gosh, this tastes like crap. Everybody goes, whoa. Well, wait a second. The 5-year-old doesn't have the faintest idea what crap means. 5-year-old heard the word on the bus coming home from school. Not responsible in the same way that a high school son takes the first bite, looks his mother in the face and says, that tastes like crap. Oh no, totally different responsibility level there. So, God holds us responsible for what we know, not for what we don't know. I think they're Luke 12, 47 and 48, from the one who's been given much, much will be required. From the one who's been entrusted with much, much more will be expected. We're not all going to be judged the same way. God judges us as unique individuals based on what we know, not based on what we don't know.
On that same basis, so if there was, I mean, this is a typical question, if there was somebody who was raised in China who had
Yep.
never heard of Jesus,
Right.
and they died.
Right?
Therefore, like based on what you're saying, that person would be excused because they wouldn't be held responsible because they never heard of Jesus before.
Okay, they're
Because,
not
like, according-
excused, but you're right.
Yeah.
They're not responsible to put their faith in Christ. They never heard about it.
Right.
There are going to be many people in heaven, the Bible teaches in Hebrews chapter 11, who never heard the word Jesus, but who in humility put their faith in God. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rahab, the Gentile prostitute, never heard of Jesus, but in humility, she put her faith in Yahweh Jehovah. She's going to be in heaven, Hebrews chapter 11 insists.
So you're saying like God and Jesus are interchangeable for people who haven't heard of Jesus.
Yeah. Now, the Bible insists that the only reason Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Rahab are going to be in heaven is because Christ bled and died on a cross. They're not going to be in heaven because they were good people and they earned heaven. You know, I live a good life, now God owes me. No, they're going to be in heaven because of God's grace. But they obviously never heard about Jesus. They were born hundreds of years before him, if not thousands of years before him. But in humility, they put their faith in God.
Okay. Can I ask you one more question? Okay. So, in your opinion, what was God's purpose in making us? Because one thing I don't understand is that it seems like, according to the Bible, like we're put on this earth to worship God. We're not put on this earth for ourselves. We're not put on this
Good.
earth for other people, but we're put to worship God.
Good.
Right?
Right?
So I don't understand why we had to be created in the first place.
Yep.
If God is all powerful and He has everything He needs,
Yep.
does He need us? Does He need our worship? Why create us?
Great question.
Because it says that God pursues a relationship between us and Him.
Yep.
And that's the most important thing about Christianity, this relationship with God. So we, according to the Bible, need that relationship. But God doesn't necessarily need that relationship because He is God. He's all powerful. He's fine as He is,
Yep.
you know?
Right.
So why create us?
Okay,
then?
good. You're absolutely right. God created us to worship Him. Not for His benefit, because He needs His ego stroked, but for our benefit. How? Peter Schaeffer wrote a play called Equus. It's a play about a young teenage boy who begins to worship a picture of Jesus over his bed. His father's an atheist. His father rips the picture of Jesus off the wall and replaces it with a picture of a horse. To the father's amazement, his son begins to worship the picture of the horse. Now, I maybe came on too strong, but that is exactly what I was trying to tell the guy, two people before you. Kevin. You see, when Kevin says, I'm just agnostic, I don't know. I don't know what I'm living for. There's no evidence. I just haven't checked it out. I just don't know. That's impossible, Rachel. Why? Because you're not a machine. You're not a programmed robot. All of us have motive. We're driven or motivated by someone or something. I don't care if it's for the next party. I don't care if it's for my rational mind, science. Something motivates us. A career, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I'm sorry, we're not machines. We're not robots. We're not automatons. We are motivated people. You're living for something. I'm living for something. In other words, you worship. Because to worship simply means to consider ultimately worthy. And what is so sad in America is how many people think what is ultimately worthy of my life is money. The American dream. 2, 3, 4 cars. Upwardly mobile. That's the purpose of my life. That's why I'm here at university. To position myself to make more money. Fine. But let's be honest. That's faith. That's a worldview that says, I worship money. That's ultimately worthy, so here we go. College education, climb the corporate ladder, that's where it's at. So we all worship. Now, what Jesus Christ is saying is, you build your worth on money, yourself, your mind, a career, your family, physical pleasure, athleticism, academia, whatever your option is, and you are going to self-destruct. Why? Because those options will ultimately fail you. I, the living God, Jesus says, will never fail you. I will always be with you. Therefore, to worship me leads to life. It leads to health. It leads to balance in life. It leads to wisdom, as opposed to living for the American dream or whatever other option you're considering.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Good to meet you. All right, thanks.
What made you choose Christianity among different religions, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism? Is there a particular, were you born into that religion, or did you transcend the ability to rationalize to be Christian?
Okay, my mom and dad were followers of Christ. They taught me about Christ, but I grew up in New England. I went to a New England prep school where faith in Christ was intellectually unacceptable.
Okay.
So, I had to battle through, intellectually, what am I going to believe? Who am I going to trust? So the reason that I put my faith in Christ is, first of all, because I saw how the teachings of Christ make life better. To be honest with you, I grew up in a very loving home, and I saw that life really is all about love. Not a feeling, not an emotion of love, but a decision to seek the highest good of somebody else. So my experience of life drew me to Christ. Then I had to say, okay, but intellectually, what's the story here? And so I had to go through doubt and skepticism and say, okay, what's the historical evidence that Christ is reliable?
Okay, well, see, I don't have a particular religious incline on a particular...
You're a deist?
Yeah, for the most part.
Got it,
Because, I mean, I was born into a Catholic family, two Catholic parents.
Yeah.
But through rationality, I also believe the master clockwork theory,
Good.
clockmaker, because
Makes sense,
it's
right?
rational that
Yeah,
step
good.
came from another step.
Right.
But it's not rational to me as to why so many religions developed among the last million years or hundreds of thousand years, and eventually, like, Greek mythology died out. It was various Orthodox religions didn't progress, and now we have 5 or so strong religions currently that
Right.
are all vying for power, but there's not one that's dominant over the other. And if all 5 of them reject each other, then only one can be correct, or none of them can be correct.
Good. I agree.
So I don't see the rationality in choosing Christianity if you're born Christian. Whereas if one rationalized through choosing the 5, I'd see it as more a better decision. Because if a person's born without religion,
Right.
there's no innate tendency for them to become religious. Person's born in the forest and grow up with animals, they're not going to become religious. Religion's something man created to justify the events on earth, and therefore we interpret it to a degree that suits us. And it is probable, it's possible that one of the justifications is true. It's just doesn't make sense to me as to why we all have to take a particular stance and not accept various viewpoints as justifiable, I guess.
Okay, so we look at Islam, we look at Judaism, we look at Hinduism, we look at Christianity. Obviously, they agree in certain ways.
Oh, they're very similar.
Aren't
Islam
they?
and Christianity are very, very similar.
They're very close. But then there are also fundamental contradictions.
Yeah.
So, the law of non-contradiction applies. If they contradict each other, they can't both be equally true.
Yeah.
Right? So now we've got to read the Quran. If we're seriously considering Islam, we got to read the Vedas and Upanishads. If we're seriously considering Hinduism, we got to read the Gospels. If we're seriously considering Christ.
Yeah.
And we have to ask ourselves, does the evidence point to Muhammad being a reliable source of information about God? Does the evidence point to Jesus Christ being a reliable source of information about God? We've got to follow the evidence.